You know, there are people who argue that Muhammad never existed, like there used to be people who argued that Jesus never existed, because, you know, we don't have actual documentary evidence for it. We only have the evidence from within the religious tradition. But the people who argue that, I think, are rather willful in overlooking a couple of pieces of evidence, well, not documentary exactly, but there is, for example, a scrap of Syriac text that dates from something like 634, which is only a couple of years after the Prophet died, that talks about, in Syriac, the Tayyaye de Mehmet. It talks about the nomads of someone named, looks like Muhammad, right? So this is like almost immediately after he dies, there's a non-Muslim, shall we say, not from the believers community, a reference to an event involving a raid by these people, and they're associated with the name of a person named Mehmet. So I think we have to accept that, yeah, the Prophet was there.
The manuscript British Library Additional 14461, you don't need to memorize that, is a beautiful 6th century biblical codex. For in the 7th century, this book functioned somewhat analogous to a modern family Bible. That is, just as in the present day, many printed Bibles begin with a few extra pages to include personal information like marriages, baptisms, and the like, so too many ancient biblical manuscripts. Thus, this manuscript originally had a blank page at the front of the Bible. Now, in the year 637 CE, just a couple of years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, a Syriac writer used this extra space to compose an eyewitness report to the Islamic conquests. The result is the earliest surviving text about Islam. But like most ancient codices, at some point this book lost its cover. And as this picture results, sees the result of this, which is that the surviving note is very poorly preserved. But when I was at the British Library the other summer, the library's Conservancy Department helped me analyze this document using multispectral imaging. And as you can see in the composite image, the results are at least a little bit clearer than simply using natural light. So too, with the help of image processing algorithms originally developed to analyze the spotting patterns of frog skin, I'm not making that up, was able to bring out some additional details. Now, the detailed analysis shows that the surviving text twice refers to Muhammad. It also speaks to Arabs to towns surrendering, to substantial Byzantine casualties. In this way, this family Bible in many ways foreshadows characteristics found throughout the first decades of Syriac writings on Islam. Like the writer of this note, mid-7th century Syriac authors knew about Muhammad.
النص الذي كتب على صفحة إنجيل ليس إلا نصا واحدا ضمن مجموعة المصادر الخارجية التي كتبت قبل عبد الملك، والتي تحدثت عن شخصية نبي العرب محمد. لقد عرضناها في مناسبة سابقة، ولا بأس من التذكير بها هنا سريعا. لقد جاء ذكر نبي ظهر بين العرب في نص تعاليم يعقوب، كتب بعد وفاة محمد بسنوات قليلة، وفي نص لتوما القسيس، وهو أيضا مبكر جدا، وفي حوليات خوزستان التي تم تأليفها نحو عام 40، وفي كتاب تاريخ هرقل من الأربعينات أيضا، ثم في الحوليات المارونية، وفي كتاب يوحنا بن الفنكي، وفي نص ليعقوب الرهاوي ثم إننا نملك درهما سك في خلافة ابن الزبير عام 66 كتب عليه محمد رسول الله على الهامش، وهو بذلك من الآثار التي ذكر فيها محمد كرسول قبل أن يسيطر عبد الملك على الأراضي الإيرانية. إن جميع تلك الآثار والنصوص الخارجية تمنع أي مؤرخ من إنكار وجود محمد. لذلك لا يوجد اليوم مؤرخ بالمعنى الصميم للكلمة ينكر وجوده. تشتكي مجموعة إنارة من تهجم الأكاديميين عليهم، كما وقع في ردهم على ما كتبه برنشتيل المتخصص في فيلولوجيا اللغات السامية. كما تروج للفكرة القائلة بأن الجامعات الغربية صارت تدافع عن الإسلام نظرا لما تتلقاه من أموال خليجية طائلة مثل هبات الوليد بن طلال. لقد رسم أعضاء إنارة بالفعل من قبل الباحثين الألمان بأصحاب النية المبيتة، وبأن طرحهم يهدف إلى الدفاع عن المسيحية بشكل معلن، بل لقد وصمت أطروحاتهم بالراديكالية والمتطرفة.
There's a third school that has received lots of attention, also located in Germany, the University of Saarbrücken. It's called the Inara Group, the Enlightenment Group. Somebody needs to be enlightened in their view, and it's don't want to be too critical about them. There's wonderful scholars affiliated also with that group, but they are most extreme in their revisionist approach, and they try to take the Quran really out of its context. They even try to take Muhammad out of the Quran, and they probably are most clearly represented by the work of Christoph Luxemburg, a scholar who wants to radically rephrase the Quran and to make it a document that is entirely dependent on previous sources. So this is probably the most extreme of the revisionist school.
بعيدا عن الاتهامات المتبادلة والتي لا فائدة منها، يعنينا أن ننظر بهدوء في حججهم، ولو أننا بدأنا بأهمها، وهي قولهم بأن النص الذي بين أيدينا سرياني في الأصل، كتب بلغة هجينة بين العربية والسريانية فأسيء فهمه، فسنجد أنه ما من أحد من خبراء اللغة السريانية يوافق على ذلك الطرح.
I will start something off, but I know that my colleagues will have a lot to say about this. That actually gets to a very big topic. So when the Quran is written, when the Quran is put together, it's drawing on a very wide range of Christian and Jewish sources. And of course, the Christian sources, by definition, are coming through Syriac Christian habits. So much of the making, not just of the Quran, but of early Islamic practice, really basic things we think of, is borrowing from the practice of Syriac Christian churches. The way in which, the way that mosques look, for example, the fact of prostrating in prayer, which we think of as characteristically Muslim, is something that is, of course, taken from Christian monastic practice. And I can say that with a lot of confidence. But then, of course, there are some people who go way beyond that. And I was going to ask Michael what he thought of one particular author. There's a pseudonymous author called Christoph Luxemburg, who makes a far-reaching argument for what the Quran is. And loosely, he says it's a bad mistranslation of Syriac Christian texts. And there are all sorts of famous examples here. And I will just mention that briefly. And would somebody else like to take that up? Because I have my view on it, but I don't want to monopolize this. What do you make of that?
So, I mean, one thing, even going back in terms of background, we know so much less about early Islam than we did 20 years ago.
That's progress.
And what I mean, and what I said is exactly right.
Right, it is.
When I was finishing grad school, I was all ready to teach a class on early Islam. I had so much I could tell you about the 7th century with so much certainty, and so could everyone else. And now I just don't know, and no one else does. That is what I think the field has come to recognize, is our source material is very, very sparse for the 1st century of Islam. We have the Quran. We have a very small document called the Constitution of Medina. We have some coins. We have 2 inscriptions in a dam saying that such and such caliph built that dam. And that's about all we have for the first 150 years. And as a result, for me, looking from the outside, the field of early Islamic studies is extremely interesting because it's all this reassessment of what might we know. And I've seen similar reassessments in our scholarship of early Christianity or our scholarship of the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament, as you have a group of folks realizing that if you just put on the hat of a historian, our evidence isn't quite as good as we used to think it was. And the result is that you have no consensus anymore on what did early Islam look like. And one of the big battlefields in scholarship, which occasionally goes more into the popular press as well, is the question of the Quran. And questions such as when it was it written by a single author or multiple authors, where it was written, what are its different sources. And in terms of this one author who suggests that it actually is a translation from the Syriac, I feel that I have not yet found scholars in Syriac Christianity who agree with that. And so I think that it's, in some ways, what I would call a lonely argument, but one that I see is reflective of a very productive move in the scholarship of saying, look, since we don't know a lot, we need to kind of rethink this. But I think most of us, for that particular argument, have not been convinced yet.
كانت تلك أولى حجج مجموعة إنارة. وأما حجتهم الثانية، وهي المتعلقة بتأويل اسم محمد الذي جاء ذكره في المصحف 4 مرات إلى المبارك يسوع، فيقول برنشتيل إن الواقع يثبت أن الجذر حمد لا دليل على وجوده البتة في اللغة السريانية، أي أن كلمة أولش السريانية هذه لا وجود لها أصلا. وهكذا فإن مجموعة إنارة لا تبني أطروحاتها على تأويلات مبالغ فيها فحسب، بل على معلومات خاطئة وعلى مختلقات لا أساس لها من الصحة. سوف نكمل في الجزء الثالث والأخير عرض بقية الأخطاء التي وقع فيها أعضاء هذه المجموعة، خاصة ما يتعلق بقراءة العملات.